Monsieur Anber.
Monsieur Cassarin, how are you, brother?
I'm doing very well. Glad to see that everything's okay on your end as well in the man cave downstairs office area while you await a few more days before you are released into the outside world and can then resume your day-to-day stuff after almost over with the quarantine, coming back from the Mick Conlan and Derek Chisora fights.
Trying to comprehend the insanity.
We touched on that last week, and we got a lot to get to tonight.
But you know what makes it even crazier is that sitting in isolation, in quarantine, and watching 73,000 fans in Texas. What? How can it be so different one from the other? I don't know.
Well, exactly. And the Canelo Billy Joe Saunders fight over the past weekend with the fans in attendance was really a special night. There's a lot to get to, and we figured who better also to join us than our good friend, the Iceman, John Scully, who I'm sure was watching the fight, of course, as well as most boxing fans were. And he confirmed to me that he did, and he'll be joining us here momentarily. And there's just so much to get to. I mean, and if we're going to see Scully here in a sec, Russ, I don't know if if that was the first kind of impression you saw with the fans that stood out to you as well, being a big fight in front of 70,000 people.
Look, I mean, that fight was definitely going to be a big fight anytime, okay? And that's what you would have expected. Had we not had the pandemic, that's exactly what you would have expected to happen. I'm just sitting there thinking, how is this possible that in the middle of a pandemic, well, not in the middle, I mean, we could be tail end, who knows where we are, but we are in a worldwide crisis, as we all know, and there's 73,000 people there. And then it almost seemed a little bit hypocritical that, the people, the judges and the referee, are wearing a mask and that's it. Like, that's going to protect you against 73,000 people, no social distancing involved. The only thing I will say, which I liked and I noticed, was that they created an area of security around the ring and kept the participants away from the fans, which I thought was really good. And I hope that that's something that comes to fruition more and more in boxing, where they make that area around the ring where people can't get to and it's not crowded and people sitting on top of you and whatnot. I think it's best if they do that, and it makes for the fighters, for the camps and corners, easy to work, and it makes it a safe place. So I think that's the best thing that might have come out of this pandemic, is that they seal off that area and no one can have access to it. They got the riot gates all the way around. You can't get there. I think that's perfect.
And speaking of our good friend Iceman, John Scully, joining us now, I think after maybe, with technology now, Ice finally has a seat. It's one of the first time I think he'll be sitting down and not standing up holding his phone for this one. But I think there's a bit of a delay for him to tune in. So thank you, Russ, for, I will get to the fans and that setup in a second here. But Ice, thanks. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. How you guys doing?
Good. And Russ was talking about the 73,000 fans in Texas and the setup. Just real quick, is that something you think they should try to implement, of keeping as many people, like when, let's say when everything returns back to normal someday, of keeping that distance and not crowding so much in the ring? Because you look at some of these old school clips sometimes of some of these classic fights, and the amount of people that come into the ring after the events is insane, right? So I don't know if that's something you notice or think it matters at all.
Well, I think a lot of times, a lot of people, a majority of people in the ring after those fights absolutely do not belong there, like at all. Like they are useless. And even before the fight, like I don't even know how these guys get in the ring. You always get the guy with the sunglasses. He's always the friend, and he always feels the need to wear sunglasses at night, inside in the winter. There's always that guy, and he always mean mugs the other fighter. Like and it's like, listen, relax. Like, you're gonna be sitting down in the second row in like 5 minutes. Like, relax.
Not even the second row. You're gonna be the 10th row.
But you're not fighting anyone. Like, stop trying to give Felix Trinidad the evil eye, okay? Because you're gonna get your friend killed.
And go ahead, Russ.
It's funny that you mentioned that, but there was a video that was circulating leading up to the fight, in which Canelo was walking to, I don't know, a presser or something, and walked through the lobby of the hotel. I
saw that.
People from, you saw that, right, Scully? Like the people from, Saunders' camps are telling him, come on, mate, grow a pair, grow some bollocks, grow some balls, right? And like, bro, this guy will kill you. Like, well, who are you to be saying that? Now, if Saunders wants to say that, Saunders is going to be the one to face that music when he goes in the ring. And like,
Right.
although I'm not a fan of that kind of stuff, if he wants to do that, it's his gig. He's the one that when the ref says, okay, clear the ring, he's the only one that doesn't leave. But all those other guys, the camp people who talk shit, I hate to say that, but talk that crap, and you are not the one in the ring. As a matter of fact, that you couldn't even stay with this guy. And that just bothers me to no end, bro.
That's and that's like, they feel like they have to do that. Like, I've had guys, when I was fighting, I actually had friends of mine ask me, like, really excited, and they're like, oh man, let me walk to the ring with you. And I'm like, are you insane? Are you crazy? And he goes, oh, but I see it on TV. I go, listen, you're not that guy. You're not in the ring with me. You're not going to be that guy mean mugging Michael Nunn, knowing you will never have to take a punch from Michael, and I'm going to have to, and he might be mad. It's so stupid. It's so ridiculous.
All right. Well, the fans in attendance definitely was a big boost. I think it was great. At one point, Canelo, of course, as well, waved to them while he was getting closer to coming up with a knockout win. So Canelo improves to 56-1-2. It defeats again a top opponent, third win since the month of December. So he's also very active. The first question, there's a lot to untangle from this fight and the post-fight and the future for Canelo. We'll get to all of it. But first and foremost, was anything from the result of the technical knockout win, besides maybe, of course, the surprise orbital bone break of Billy Joe Saunders suffered from at the hands of Canelo, was there anything from that fight that went differently than you thought it was going to happen?
Who do you want to answer first?
You can go ahead, Russ. Go first.
Listen, I thought Saunders was a legitimate guy, the same way that, Callum Smith, I thought, is a legitimate guy. Like, these guys are good. Like, he has an amateur pedigree. He's been fighting his whole life. He's undefeated. He's a world champion. Like, the guy's good and he can fight. We've seen evidence of just how good he is. And for Canelo to have done what he's done, and when you look back on the last 3 fights he's had in less than 6 months, you say what you want, hindsight, that's always perfect. But Callum Smith was an undefeated world champion and winner of the Ali Trophy, and was debilitating guys with one-punch knockout. George Groves, one-punch knockout. Like, I mean, he's crushing guys. Like, he's a legitimate threat. He's a big man, legitimate threat. Avni Yildirim, again, you look back and say, okay, he didn't deserve to be there. Well, he was still the #1 mandatory for whatever that's worth, and Canelo took care of that. And then Billy Joe Saunders, for him to do what he's done just proves how great this guy is. And there is no way this guy is not going down. I won't say the greatest, but if he's not going down as one of the greatest Mexicans ever, and I mean comfortably ever, then something's wrong with people in the world, because this guy has a resume unlike very few fighters today. His record reads like a Hall of Fame list of fighters that he has fought. He beats guys in convincing manner. He was in control from the minute the bell rang. His defense is unbelievable. It's just gotten better with time. And his style has even changed now, where he believes so much in his defense and so much in his punching power that he is walking to guys. He's walking to undefeated. Saunders might not be the debilitating puncher that Callum Smith is, but he's walking to these guys like they're nothing, like they're C-level fighters, and he believes in his power so much, and he's crushing guys. He destroyed Callum Smith's arm. He broke Billy Joe Saunders' face. I mean, this is a rarity we see in our lifetime. The guy has just under 60 professional fights, and he's 30 years old. Sorry if I took all your thunder there, Scully. I hope I left something for you.
You did good. I was enthralled. Yeah. I was enthralled, Russ. Hey, but I'll say this. I thought Billy Joe would create more stylistic trouble early on. I thought he was going to have some, whether you call it success or, I thought he was going to create a puzzle, that was going to get solved eventually. But I thought he was going to create a puzzle. But Canelo is, to me, what the epitome of professional. Like he's scientific and he's mentally prepared, he's physically prepared. And, and a lot of people don't say this, but you got to give his trainer a ton of credit. I mean, this guy is preparing this freaking guy, and his defense, he was never known as, when I thought of him before he fought, say, Triple G, defense wasn't the first thing that popped in my head when I thought of Canelo. Now, you watched, I saw a video slowed down, slow motion, when he fought Triple G. He looked like Mayweather. Like he literally looked like they told him, hey, imitate Floyd Mayweather. What would Floyd Mayweather do? And he's like, turn, boop, boop, like it was impressive. He's a guy, it's weird. You don't see too many guys get that much better after they become a superstar. like this guy, he could have went, hey, I'm really good. Like this is cool. And he's like, whatever he's doing, his technique is better. His professionalism is better. I mean, he's a role model for fighters, and I hope they're paying attention.
Well, I mentioned something to you earlier today. How many fighters do you know have become bigger punchers 60 fights into their pro career? Right. He's become not only a great defensive fighter, he's conservative in his approach. He makes you miss by inches. It's not a question of, okay, I make you miss by this much. He's standing right there in front of you and just doing this, and he's making you miss, And now he's become a debilitating puncher. He's crushing guys with one shot. He's hurting them. And if he doesn't knock you out, he hurts you so much that you put up through so much pain through 12 rounds of suffering through that. That's how, who gets better? What you said about his defense, I thought the Golovkin fight showed, wow, he's really maturing and his defense is good and he's confident. I remember that one shot that Golovkin threw at him and he turned his head like this and came back and he made him miss. He rolled right with the shot. I said, he's really coming into his own. But now his punching power, if you watch the Golovkin fight, he didn't even punch like that the way he was punching on Saturday night. Right.
He's just, you're getting that, you're, as a fighter myself, I know, there's differences. Like sometimes you feel so comfortable and you just get into that groove and you feel like you could stay there and you could dig. And he's like doing that, but like magnified. Like you're watching it and you're going, this guy is a little animal. Like he's fearless and he's digging. He does something that I try to get all my fighters to do. And Shane Mosley used to do it. Shane Mosley did it when he stopped Margarito. I said, he's throwing the hooks to the body, like he's rolling and he's coming back. It looks like they told him, we will give you $100 million if you could put your glove into this guy's spleen. Like if you could go through the ribs and cut through his ribs and break all the skin and get blood all over your glove, we'll give you $1 million. That's what he looks like he's trying to do. He looks like he's trying to rip your body out. Shane Mosley's the only guy I remember who really looked like he was trying to do that. And that's what Canelo looks like. Canelo is not trying to win on points. He's trying to do damage, and he's
right. But
hard to watch.
No, 100%. He's entertaining. He's one of the pound for pound best right now. He's the pound for pound best, but he cares about trying to finish in style. That's something definitely, Scully, I agree with. But something you brought up with Saunders in the fight, to get back to the Saunders fight here for a second, is that early on you thought Saunders might present more of a stylistic problem for Canelo, because I agree, and I think all of us are in accordance here that we thought Canelo was in control throughout the fight. But a lot of people watching the fight, tweeting about it on the DAZN scorecards, had Saunders up, winning the fight at one point, and really winning the first early stages of the round. I disagree. How did you see it, Scully and Russ?
Go ahead, Scully.
I mean, he wasn't winning, and it's weird. I believe the power of manipulation is so strong that if you're watching a fight, if you're looking on Twitter and you're watching the fight and you see, Max Kellerman's got it by 1 point, and you'll go, yeah, it's close fight, close. And next thing you know, you're tweeting about how close of a fight it is, but you wouldn't have thought that if you didn't see Max Kellerman just say it a minute ago. Like, I think the power of influence, it's why they always say, if you watch a fight with Larry Merchant and Jim Lampley and Emmanuel Stewart talking, and then you watch it without them, it's amazing the differences that you see. I think people are influenced by outside stuff, and people are on Twitter, and I think they're just parroting what other people say. Somebody said it's close, and then they start a new thread. Yeah, it's close fight, man. One round either way. I don't know if they even believe it. I think they just copy what other people say.
It's, I'm guilty. I'm guilty because during the fight, I'm sitting watching it, and I was texting a friend in England at the same time, and I said, Canelo has won every round. And the guy says, nah. I said, well, if you think he lost a round, it's because he gave it away. At worst, I've got it 7-1. And then I went on Twitter, and Lou DiBella said he had it 6-2. And I said, yeah, 6-2, that sounds about right. But because nobody else said 7-1. And I thought, well, they're going to think I'm crazy. But I'm not crazy, because the things he did, understanding the subtleties of boxing and knowing what he did. So too many times, television analysts, judges even, will look at you and say, he did better that round. He only got hit 5 times instead of 20 times like he did the last round. So he must be winning the round. But those 5 shots were great shots that should have won the round for the guy, and everything he did, his ring generalship, the way he controlled the fight, should win you the round, but they don't see it that way. They often look on, oh, you won that round. So they look for you to do better the next round. And if you don't, they swing the score the other way. You know that, Scully. We've seen that time and time again.
Yeah. Well, you know what? A lot of times a guy will fight someone that he's not supposed to beat. So if he doesn't get killed, they go, hey, I think he won that round.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, no, he just didn't get annihilated like you thought he was gonna. He didn't win the round. So, if you guys have given Roy Jones an unexpected tough round, and he got that round, because they're not used to seeing Roy be human, Yeah. So it's very, very subjective. It's insanely subjective.
And it's sometimes sad that, I thought the judges did a relatively good score. I can't see how you give 3 rounds to Saunders. They're looking for that round to give to him because you want it to be close. But if you're sitting there watching it, listen, to me, there was never 2 seconds where he wasn't in control. And when you said earlier that you expected Saunders to set traps and be stylistically problematic for Canelo, I believe he was doing that, but it was so short-lived. He solutioned the problem instantaneously that it was no longer a problem. And one of the reasons why it had to be problematic, strategically problematic for him, was Saunders had to be able to touch him. And Saunders threw and threw and threw and threw. Every now and then a jab would land, a long-range southpaw jab.
Yeah, you connected.
The defense was so great. He was swatting flies when you're not hitting the target, it's hard to create traps and problems.
Right. Yeah.
Now, to the stoppage itself. So the 8th round, he lands that big counter uppercut that we find out later on breaks his orbital bone. Now Saunders goes into the corner, and that's why I think it's great, Russ, as you begin countless fights and many that you stop yourself as a coach, Scully being a fighter in the corner. Twitter and social media, again, went crazy with this stoppage. You had people say, of course, great on the coach to do it. And others said, Billy Joe Saunders, you know what? He should have went out on his shields. He should have done everything he could to not make that fight, be stopped there and to come out in the 9th round. And he didn't put up enough of a fight in the corner to continue the fight. I want to hear your thoughts on that, because again, we see so much the divisiveness on social media on the topic, and a lot of people who accuse Billy Joe Saunders of quitting are people who've never stepped into the ring in their entire life. But there have been some fighters and former fighters who've also commented saying, you know what, you got to go out, you got to force your hand here. ultimately the trainer was going to stop it probably anyways. But I'd like to know your thoughts on the stoppage itself.
Go ahead, Scully.
I'll say this. I'm human now. Like when I was boxing, I used to tell my trainer before the fight, before every fight, walk into the ring, I would say, listen, don't stop this fight under any circumstances. Like, and I used to tell him, if I have to die, let me die, and he's like, yeah, okay. And cause the referee is gonna, but I said, look, if the referee stops it, okay, but don't you stop it. I don't care what happens. Now that I'm 53 and I'm training fighters and I'm seeing it from a different perspective, you've got to be a moron, to think that way, like, to say that, like, dying in the ring is moronic. You know what I mean? Like, you can have the heart and all of that. And I'm glad I felt the way that I did, but I'm also glad that I'm here. You know what I mean? And, it's like, you don't want to, one thing I'll say this, the guy was hurt. I'm quite sure. Look, I've had paper cuts that really hurt, right? They really hurt. Imagine a broken orbital bone. I'd imagine it's an issue. Now, what people don't realize is like, oh, he had a broken orbital bone. Billy Joe Saunders, for all he knows, his brain is bleeding. For all he knows, he doesn't know what's wrong with him. I'm sure the pain in his head was unbelievable. And I'll tell you this much, the pain he felt the next day was nobody should have to feel, and how his face probably looked. So he knows, he's a championship level guy. He's a good fighter. You pay to see people, you pay to see human beings reach their limit. Now, Evander Holyfield and Muhammad Ali spoiled people. Arturo Gatti and Mickey Wood, they spoiled people into these depths. This guy reached his limit. You paid to see it, and that's what you got. He reached down. He didn't quit the first time he got a bloody nose. I mean, it's a broken orbital bone. I can certainly say, okay, Billy Joe, good job. You did good, because it's a broken orbital bone. I mean, I know people who wouldn't go to work with a paper cut, and they're talking on the internet about the guy's a quitter. I'm like, you would call in sick, crying with a paper cut. You know what I mean? And you're criticizing this guy for a broken orbital bone. I mean, come on now.
The thing is, he didn't quit. Mark Tibbs called it in the corner, and that's what Mark Tibbs is supposed to do. Mark Tibbs is supposed to be the one to make the call. The camera didn't stay. The camera work was shoddy at best, because back in the day, the producer and the director would have had that camera on that corner. You would have heard everything, seen everything. We don't know what happened. He was hidden in the corner, and all of a sudden Canelo was celebrating, and the commentators didn't even know Saunders wasn't coming out. All the men were still in the ring, and Canelo was celebrating, and they were still calling the fight. They didn't know it was over. So they didn't get into the corner for us to see. So many fighters have had different thresholds of pain and what they could go through. I think all the negative feedback that has come back is, when you talk, when you say things, you're going to have to live with the repercussions that come with that when it doesn't go your way. Now, Saunders was out publicly criticizing Daniel Dubois for taking a knee when he got his orbital bone crushed against Joe Joyce, and called him, he came out. So now you're going out of your way to ridicule and attack another. That was intentional.
Yeah.
And then when he said to Canelo, he said, I got heart. You haven't fought somebody with heart like me. Right. And so I think that was another issue. These things come back to haunt you. So when you say those kind of things, you have to live with what's going to come back and what people are going to say about you. And I think that there should be interviews with all the same people who talk crap leading up to the fight, and people who disparaged Canelo and who said he wasn't good and called him a bum and that this guy was going to give him a masterclass lesson, blah, 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 blah. These people should have to be interviewed after the fight and say, well, This is what you said before. What do you have to say now?
Right.
And they don't. They all go into like kind of hiding and nobody says anything. So that's why I just like, you know, the guys like the Canelos, the Joshuas, the Usyks, the people who let the fighting be done in the ring and let the chips fall where they may, because that's the dangerous part in the ring and the dangerous things that could happen, like what happened to Billy Joe Saunders.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. Now, after Canelo, of course, already is talking about making plans to unify the 168-pound division. The one guy left is Caleb Plant. And there's excitement for Canelo wanting to be active. Again, he's saying he's going to fight at least one more time this year. Who knows? Maybe he gets a second fight by the end of it, and it'll be an extremely active schedule for most elite fighters, especially the best fighter pound for pound. But anything from that fight, and Billy Joe Saunders brought a lot of different, difficulties on paper. But when you look at what Canelo's been doing, do you think Caleb Plant brings something really that how Canelo can be anything other than a big favorite against any of these fighters at 168 pounds? To me, doesn't seem like it's likely anyone's going to be really looked at it and say, you know what, that's a 50-50 fight. Maybe Caleb Plant presents challenges, but I think on paper, if Caleb Plant's the next fight, there's really nobody right now who's going to be able to defeat Canelo Alvarez at 168 pounds.
Scully, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, he's reaching that almost like that Roy Jones prime thing where it's like, there's nobody. Like, he's gonna have to go fight heavyweight. He's gonna have to fight a Godzilla. You have Demetrius Andrade trying to get the fight, who I do think stylistically would create problems, but still, I mean, Demetrius. One thing about Demetrius, he's not a puncher, and I know that firsthand. He's very slick, very skilled. I think he would give problems just because of his fluidity and everything, if that's a word, fluidity.
It's a word.
But it is. Okay, good.
Yeah.
But I don't think he has the power to trouble Canelo. But other than that,
Scully, I'll get to Caleb Plant in a second, but since you brought up Andrade, what about the antics of trying to go with him in his camp after the fight in the press conference? What's up, Russ?
Hold on. I want to finish the thought on the question as to, about Caleb Plant, because I think that's, I think there's an important thing here. If Canelo's next fight is not against Caleb Plant, boxing is sick. Like, it is beyond repair. If that fight is not made, this Caleb Plant will never have a better opportunity for a money fight than this. If Caleb Plant is going to avoid a fight with...
Anybody's doubting that. I think it's almost a shoo-in that the fight's going to happen.
Okay, well, that's good then. That's fine. Okay, good.
Okay, but we'll get to the style of Caleb Plant, what he presents. There's been no kind of inclination whatsoever that it's going to be a difficult fight to make. It's almost like you say Canelo chooses, and then you get the phone call and you say, thank God I got the payday, and now let's see what I can do. And if I win, it's a huge upset. If I don't, hey, listen, I went up against the best and I made a career high payday.
Well, I'm glad you seem so confident that it's a done deal. I hope it is. But in this day and age of boxing, I don't know of anything that's that easy to do, especially when you're dealing with completely opposite ends of promotional contracts with Caleb Plant and DAZN and Canelo or Eddie Hearn or whoever is in charge, to do that. I hope you're right, but that has to be the bout that's made. And then when you have a unified champion, now it's going to be interesting to see who's going to want to be in line for the Canelo lottery. The David Benavidez of the world, the Charlos of the world. Now those guys are going to have to fight each other to determine who wins the lottery to fight Canelo. Because now it's fractured. When you have when you have 4 champions per division, you can't make those matches because everybody aligns up to say, okay, I'll go for this title, I'll go for this title, and they don't fight each other. When Canelo has all the belts, all these guys are going to have to fight each other. They can only go after one champion, and that's going to be Canelo. And I hope that the sanctioning bodies protect that and keep him as champion and don't strip him, because he's unified and it should try to be unified for as long as possible. And the fighters have to go Fight each other to get to him. No more of the phony fights of I'm a champion, I'm a champion, I'm a champion. No, you got to fight one guy. So I hope that the Caleb Plant fight gets made. God bless Caleb that he gets that kind of a payday. He certainly deserves it as the champion, but he has to fight Canelo.
Okay, fair enough. Now get back to just Andrade for a second, Scully, because you brought the stylistic matchup that Andrade could present. Andrade's at 160 right now. Maybe he moves up to 168. Canelo hasn't closed the door about potentially coming down, at a 160 or a catch weight going forward. But Andrade made a lot of noise in the post-fight presser that Canelo, who people are starting to understand, speaks English, although he chooses when. But he spoke a lot of English in that presser, and the swear words and the profanity are very good for Canelo. No accent too much there, but I think Andrade doesn't get enough spotlight, doesn't get enough attention. He's been ducked by many opponents at 160, and many of the big fights have avoided him. But did he go about it the wrong way of kind of storming the press conference of Canelo after that big win, do you think, Scully?
I mean, I think at this point, I'll say this. I think he's very talented. I think he might be the worst managed and promoted fighter in history. Like, it's unbelievable. People in my gym don't even know who he is. Like, if you walked up to amateur kids in my gym getting ready for Golden Gloves and say, what do you think of Demetrius Andrade? There's no doubt in my mind they have no idea who he is. He's just not high profile for his skill level. And he's, I guess he's a two-time world champion. They can't get him the big fights. He had to do something, dramatic. He had to. And I mean, for better or worse, it worked. I mean, more people have been talking about him in the last week than have talked about him his entire life, so he for better or worse, he did a good thing. He's on people's minds. Now, if he could turn that into, something, one thing I don't think about him, I don't think his personality, I don't think he's like a real, interviewing him is not like a real exciting event. Like, it's not like interviewing Muhammad Ali or, Sugar Ray Leonard, that type of thing. So, but I think his skill level is there. He's certainly as skilled as, as Billy Joe. And, I think I would be interested. That's a fight I would personally be interested in. I don't know if regular boxing fans would. I think a lot of people, I've seen it where people say that Demetrius is boring. They don't like his style, but boring doesn't mean bad. That's what people need to realize. People say, "Oh, the guy's boring." I go, "Yeah, a lot of guys are boring, but they're good. Like, they're really good."
Lara was considered a boring style and gave a lot of trouble to Canelo. I'm not sure this style of Canelo would have as much difficulty with the Lara now. He's certainly improved dramatically since that fight. But Andrade is one of those names. You go, okay, Caleb Plant. We know Caleb Plant brings a different style of fight completely than Billy Joe Saunders. But almost everyone that you talk to in the boxing world is saying it's probably going to be a Canelo victory and probably a stoppage at that as well. But let's say that if you remove the Caleb Plant fight from the equation and then Canelo's unified, we'll just, for the moment here, just look at the exercise of who are the big names that if you could choose to fight Canelo right now gives him the biggest fight between 160 to 175. Benavidez.
Well, it's a Mexican matchup, right? He's a two-time world champion at 168. He hasn't lost in the ring. He's a big kid. He's a good puncher. He comes to fight. He talks the talk. There's a lot of good
storyline
chemistry for this fight. It could happen. I think with Andrade, who I find really personable. Like, I like Demetrius. I like talking to him. He's a funny guy. I think you're right, Scully, that people just don't know him and have not gotten to know him. Is that his fault? Is it management? Is it his promoter? I don't know. Something bothered me, though, about what happened that night, because it looks like Canelo takes pride in the work that he does and felt that was his evening and his night. That's his show, his promotion. And I'm worried that while some people now might know who Andrade is, Canelo still calls the shots, and you attract more flies with honey than you do with vinegar. And if you piss Canelo off and he says you're never, because he said something like, you'll never get this fight. Yeah. If Canelo says you'll never get the fight, you'll never get the fight unless you beat 62 other guys in a row to get it,
Right. And you see what he said. He goes, "Payday. You want a payday." And that's the world we live in, where he could literally reject that payday. He could take all that money out of Demetrius, and he could tell him, "You want to storm the press conference? Now you don't get paid."
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
know.
That's the power he has.
Storming of the press conferences has been happening in boxing for a long time. I even remember one of my favorite ones was Chad Dawson after one of the Bernard Hopkins fights. Scully, you're a former fighter. I don't think necessarily. I'm not sure if you were there for that one though.
Yeah, I was there.
Okay, so Jean Pascal's in attendance, and Jean's in the crowd and starts yapping at Chad, and Chad goes,
"No,
sit down with the tight pants. Sit down."
Listen, Jean was sitting right in front of me. I was on the platform on floor level. He was right in front of me. He was 5 feet from me. I love John. John's a good guy, right? But listen, I remember thinking to myself, like, wow, those pants are kind of tight, and I thought that, I remember thinking that. And all of a sudden, he got up, started talking. It was like an Ali Frazier thing. And Chad, who's not like a real verbal guy at all, the reason, I don't know if you know this, but I nicknamed Chad Bad Chad when he was a kid. That was me. And what happened was we would go to fights, and we'd be in the van for like 12 hours going to the Ohio State Fair. And him and his brother would never talk. We would never hear them say a word for 12 hours. And I'd be like, man, like this guy, this guy's up to some bad stuff back there. He's got some bad thoughts in his head. He's just thinking all the whole for 12 hours. So that's where Bad Chad came from. So Jean started to say, do his thing, and Chad, I don't know where Chad came up with it, but he said, sit down with your tight ass pants. and everybody the whole room just laughed. And Jean, it was so funny. He thought about it and he sat down, so I think he knew his pants were a little tight that day.
Yeah. So that's it. So the I don't know. Again, I think you raised good points. Andrade's going to be at the back of the line for sure for Canelo fight. What about, just raffle some names here quickly and we'll move on. But Jermall Charlo, the 160-pound version of Jermall Charlo. And what about Triple G, Gennady Golovkin? Is he out of the equation forever now? Do you think there's no interest? Because I still think fans would tune into that fight more so than probably any other opponent.
Yeah, I mean, he's Triple G. He's always going to be Triple G, But I think Canelo at this point would be a big favorite. Triple G's been inactive for the most part since they fought. Clearly, Canelo is better. He's just getting better and better. It's like he's reaching like a second prime. You know what I mean? He's got one prime on top of another one. And I think like to be honest with you, I forgot about Triple G till you mentioned him. I forgot he was even in the picture, so I think a lot of people probably feel the same way.
And especially at 68, especially if you can make the fight at 68. Triple G's never fought at 68. He's one of the few guys that I've said in the past that he would be okay to compete in the middleweight division if he had to weigh in the same day. Like he'd make weight if he had to weigh in the same day. He's one of the few guys.
You know what? I met him in Times Square one time. He was walking by himself, like in Times Square. I didn't realize. My friend Chris Brochu, he's like, "That's Triple G," and I went, "Come on, he's by himself." Like it's like midnight. It's like midnight. It was the night, I believe, Rigondeaux and Donaire fought, and we went up to him. "Oh, Triple G," and he was cool. And I remember thinking, he's not a big guy. Like I thought he was going to be much bigger, and that was what I walked away thinking. Wow, Triple G's not that big of a guy, and I don't think super middleweight would be.
He's a middleweight. He's an
average size 160-pound guy. He wasn't imposing at all.
Yeah, but Canelo's not the biggest super middleweight either. Like I think Triple G would take that fight. I think it's still a fight to me that's intriguing, but like you said, Scully, he's been so inactive. There's so little buzz, and Canelo really. You talked about Andrade not wanting to give the fight to Andrade. He's mentioned multiple times he's not interested in giving Triple G the fight again, another crack at it. So okay, let's dismiss Triple G And then whether it be Jermall Charlo or the other crazy idea I've heard is that eventually if Terrence Crawford were to move up all the way to maybe like 160, he'd present the toughest matchup on paper for Canelo. Any of those two, Charlo or Crawford, do you think could give, Canelo some issues?
Charlo definitely, I think that's the fight. I think that's, he doesn't quite have that star power yet, that Triple G has, obviously. Or for that matter, even Benavidez. I think Benavidez probably has a greater fan base. But talent-wise, he's a hell of a fighter, and that would be really a great fight to see. But Crawford, with all due respect to Bud, who I think is, one of the best fighters in boxing pound for pound right now. You could arguably say he's number 2. He's complete as a fighter. He fights from both sides. He's champion in 2 weight classes. Going from 140 to 168 is a massive step up. Like, this is now you're I think it's probably better that Canelo thinks about going to 75 and fighting a champion and winning fighting Beterbiev or something than talking about Crawford, coming up to 168. Scully?
Yeah. I would never even think of that. And I don't think Crawford would be very happy with the strength difference that he would run into. I mean, Canelo's a beast. He's just a bona fide beast at that weight. And he's not a strong welterweight. He's a strong super middleweight. You know what I mean? So we're talking 2 different worlds here.
Yeah. And Beterbiev, Russ, you mentioned that's a fight a lot of fans, when they look at on paper, if Canelo unifies the division, that's the fans that, the fight that fans want to see, because they think it would be explosive no matter how many rounds it would last. They think Beterbiev is the one guy who's powerful enough to hurt Canelo. And that's probably why Canelo's going to stay away from the fight, especially that Arthur is not a young guy. It could take some time if Canelo decides to unify the division, then fight Charlo or these other fighters at 160, 168 pounds. But Beterbiev, I think there's reasons why you think it would be justified for fans to be excited about that potential matchup on paper as one of the best in boxing. Do you not? Well,
of course, because of the power that Beterbiev brings to the ring, But I'll tell you what, that's a tough, dangerous fight. Like, obviously Canelo doesn't want to get hit by Beterbiev, and Beterbiev doesn't want to be standing on the end of those sneaky, fast counter punches of Canelo either, because there's some power behind them as well, and they hurt, like he doesn't only hurt at 168, he hurts at 175 as well. So, but it is an intriguing matchup because of the strength and power that Beterbiev brings, and the background and the pedigree that he has, and the punching power that he has. But that's far from a walk in the park for Beterbiev, though. We're in a fight.
Yeah.
100%. All right, so we've touched on a lot of these possible opponents. I had a question. I reached out to the fans before the program about Canelo. I'll get to that in a second. But Russ, we do have, of course, a sponsor for the show, and people who were putting a lot of bets over the past weekend, whether it was going to be Canelo by knockout, decision, Saunders was going to put the upset, a lot of action. And if you're interested in some of these other fights coming in this Saturday night or the weeks to come, Mr. Anber, you know who we're talking about here?
Absolutely. And again, all the people that must have been upset who bet a 9th round stoppage must have been so upset that Saunders didn't come. Those are all those people who bet on the 9th round and he didn't come out. That's why they're mad, because they could have had their bet and they could have had it double. They could have doubled their winnings. Tell them, Matt.
Yeah, so it's bet99.com. They're Canada's newest online sportsbook and casino. You be sure to check out the player props, the bet builder, the risk-free live bet bonuses. And what Russ was talking about, if you use the code BOXING99, you get a sports welcome offer. They'll deposit match of 100% up to $600. So if you did it on Canelo by knockout, you were happy, and be sure to tune in. So bet99.com. And again, thank you for trying to participate, and thank you for, of course, the encouragement, and be sure to check them out. So the question I asked the fans before was that Canelo, we talked about the counter ability and then the power that follows. Right now, the Canelo we're seeing, how many fighters in the history of boxing can you recall seeing that good of defense, but combination of knockout power? And I asked that question to the fans, and a lot of names came out. And it's not that easy, I think, as an exercise, because most great defensive fighters in the history of boxing did not possess great power. It seems like it's usually been one or the other, right? One name that came to mind was James Toney. I like that one a lot. And there was a Mike Tyson in his prime. at one point when you consider the bobbing and weaving and being able to make people miss and make them pay. Any other names, Scully and Russ, as boxing historians that come to mind as great defensive fighters with the power that Canelo possesses?
Well, when I looked at some of the answers that came back, somebody wrote Benny Leonard. And I thought, how do you know? How do you know how great of a defensive fighter and knockout artist Benny Leonard was? With all due respect for you to say that, I don't know that you can make that assumption when there is no visual proof of that to say that this guy was a great defensive fighter. And I think we also have to remember another thing when we define this. Tyson probably could be the closest one because Canelo is doing a little bit of what Tyson, a lot of what Tyson did, and that's come right to you. He's coming right at you. There's been other great fighters who have been defensive wizards, and they've been boxers and move, hoop, hoop, and they stay away from you, pop, 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 that you can't hit them. De La Hoya in his prime was a good fighter, good defensive fighter. He was hard to hit clean. But this guy comes right at you like a Mike Tyson, and you still can't hit him. There's not a lot of guys that fall into that category. The one that I would say that I like the most, the response that I like the most from the few people who answered, was Duran. Duran was a guy who would come at you and you would find him difficult to hit, but he didn't really, he was difficult to hit, but he was doing it all on power. Like he wanted, and on hitting you, not so much not getting hit, because he would even be willing sometime to take one so he could land one.
I don't think his defense is, people don't really think of Duran as being, as good of a defensive fighter as some of these other fighters.
But he was a great defensive fighter. He was very difficult to hit, but you could hit him. You could hit him because he was an offense. But Canelo, he is very, very hard to hit. Scully?
Well, I go a little different. Well, let me just say this, because a lot of people have the idea that Duran almost was like, rough and tumble and, aggressive, which he was. But Duran was very good. Like he would roll with punches and slip punches. Like,
of course,
you could slow it down, slow the videos down, and you'd be like, man, I thought he got hit 5 times. He didn't get hit at all. He didn't get hit flush once. He was very slick in that regard. For me, though, being in the ring with him, like Roy Jones didn't have a traditional, defense. He didn't have Wilfred Benitez, Canelo. He didn't have that slickness. But if you equate defense with having trouble hitting him, Roy Jones had good defense. Like he was hard, he was hard to hit, and he would hit you back. Guys would throw, good fighters, James Toney, Reggie Johnson, Bernard Hopkins the first time, they throw punches at him. And by the time they're trying to throw their third, he answers back with 5 or 6 missiles, And so I think even though he's not a traditional defensive master, I think you'd have to include Roy in that because he was hard to hit and he was hitting you back with dangerous, vicious shots.
Yeah, but Scully, the thing is, though, that Canelo sometimes won't even hit you back, and you still can't hit him. Like he comes right at you, he's walking right to you, and you still can't hit him. He picks, slips, rolls, skips away from a shot. You can't hit, and he still hasn't thrown one yet. He's not even threatening to hit you, and you can't touch him with consecutive.
And you know what it is? Being a fighter, you don't, like, as a fighter, you might not even realize 100% that he's not even hitting you. Like the intensity of him being right there and you're trying to hit, you don't even realize this guy didn't even hit me back. like I'm just missing him. And it's so intense that I'm not even realizing that I'm not even taking abuse. The thought of taking abuse is draining me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's draining me because I'm waiting. I'm tensing up because I think he's going to hit me back and he's not, which is almost as bad in a way, physically, because you're draining yourself and you find yourself tired and you're like, man, I only got hit twice, but I'm tired because this guy's a threat. He's a threat all the time. And then he sneaks it in. And now you're like, man, this freaking guy can hit me anytime he wants. So I got to spend the whole round wondering, is he going to hit me? Is he not going to hit me? What's he going to do? Do I throw punches and get hit back, or do I not throw? What do I do? He's got people thinking so much now that he can drain them just by being there and making his little moves and making, the threat of a punch, the threat of an attack. So he's a genius, and some of it might not be natural, but he's a genius.
Listen, all those great counter punchers you spoke of, they thrived on great defense to do one thing and one thing only, and that was so that they could lull you into something so they could counter punch right away. Now, obviously, Canelo does that as well, and that's how he smashed Saunders, his cheekbone, his orbital bone was with that. He made him miss and countered with the uppercut. Nothing. But Canelo goes through phases in the fight where he's right on you and doesn't throw, and you're trying to hit him and you cannot. And the last guy I saw do that, who would actually just stand there in front of you and let you throw, and he's not even worried about hitting you back. He's just inviting you to throw, is the Argentinian Scully, El Intocable.
I knew you were going to say that. that. Loche.
What's that?
Loche.
Yes, yeah, Nicolino Loche. He would just stand there and let you. He'd stand right in front of you, let you hit him. You couldn't hit him. All the other guys like Tony or Mayweather, they would lay up with great defense, and they're just waiting for you to commit to one particular shot. And when you do, usually it's the right hand, and they come back with their own right away. They don't just lay on the ropes having a good time.
Right.
So they go, I'll swing at you. But Canelo's doing that. He's standing right in front of you. He's walking to you, inviting you to hit him. And I think that speaks volumes for just how confident this guy is and how skilled he really is. There's not a lot of guys in the history of boxing can do that.
And let me say one thing, just for anybody who's watching who is not familiar with Loche, I highly recommend going to watch this guy, because the first time I saw him on video, I actually thought it was kind of like a circus fight. I thought it was almost like a movie or something. He didn't look like a real fighter, because he literally, you've seen the video, he literally like drops his head forward. He looked like he didn't even know what he was doing, but he's going, and the guys are missing him. And I'm like, how can they not hit this guy? He's standing right in front of him. And then I did my research on him. I said, man, this guy he looked like he was standing waiting for a bus. He didn't look like he was in a fight at all. And I think it was Ismael Laguna, who was a very good fighter. I think it was him who was loading up with big shots, and he's like, hey, and Laguna couldn't touch his face. It was amazing.
And he'd go, come on, he'd put his hands down, and he'd say, go ahead, and up.
And he looked like a 50-year-old grocery store worker, right? Like he didn't look like, if you saw him and went, you're going to fight that guy, you'd be like, that guy? Like, what's his name?
Okay.
Nico? I'm going to fight this old guy. Like, he looked like he was like 50, I mean, amazing fighter, 100%.
Absolutely.
And thank you again for contributing some of the names. People tuning in, have been tweeting us, continue. It's always fun to have banter. And that's one thing I've noticed about boxing compared to a lot of other sports, is that the people who are really the fans and not, the casuals or the Jake Paul crowd, forget them, but the real boxing fans will follow history or know more about the history of their sport. I find a lot more than the new age NFL fans who, in other sports. I just find boxing as a passion forum to talk about these things. And it's always great to have you two, who, as Russ Scully has told me many times, that he's taught me everything I know about boxing, but not everything he knows. So there's always everything I can learn once in a while. And maybe one of the final shots here tonight as we wrap up, we're just getting close to the hour mark here. Isn't defense something that, trainers and inspiring fighters focus on defense as well? It's the part of, the sweet science, hit and get hit. Andre Ward was excellent as well defensively, didn't have the power, of course, but how much of that, Russ, as a coach, and Scully, as a former fighter and coach now, too many fighters, maybe not fighters, but trainers, neglect that aspect of the teaching and the coaching because it's so much more difficult than doing fancy pad work and combinations. The defense is also going to be the big key of trying to make a fighter from good to great.
I don't know that you can actually name there are a few, of course, but in general, every time you think about great fighters, they were all excellent, if not superiorly great, they were excellent at defense. You know, even the most vicious fighters, you know, whether it was a Tyson, whether it was a Duran, you know, very hard to hit. Hagler was hard, even though he's coming at you, he's picking shots off, he whoop, whoop, he's making you miss, he's bending, slip. Almost every great fighter, not everyone, but almost every great fighter had great defense. And it's hard to be a great fighter without great defense. Scully?
Right. Well, you know what's funny? I remember back in like 92 being in training camp in Montreal with Otis, sparring with Otis Grant. And I remember you telling me that back then. You were saying, I remember you said, think of the greatest fighters in history. The majority of them were boxers with skills and defense. You know, you said Ali and Ray Robinson and, you know, this guy and that guy, Willie Pep. And I'm like, yeah, you know, like the all-time elite are the guys with the defense, you know, Benitez and yeah, you know, and even, yeah, all those guys. And a lot of them, and you know this, like I've sparred with so many guys, good pros, that I didn't think had good defense from watching them. But when I got in with them, I'm like, man, this freaking guy is slick. Like watching him on TV doesn't do it justice because you don't see the tiny little things he's doing. I'll tell you one, I used to spar with him. He was world champion at bantamweight, but when we sparred, he was like 140. Is Julian Solis from Puerto Rico. Jeff Chandler beat him for the title.
Right.
Julian was so good, and he reminded me of Mike McCallum. He picked his shots perfectly, and he countered, and he'd wait for you to throw, and he'd make you miss, and he'd counter. And I really learned a lot sparring with him. It was really, really something. It was like an education, you know, really slick. And people probably don't even know who Julian is, but he's a guy. Before I boxed with him, I said, this little guy, I'm going to torture this guy. and then you get in there, and he's like, whoop, whoop. Counter, you know, and he hit hard for 135, 140. He hit like a middleweight, you know, because he was a pro and he knew how to place the shot. And I learned a lot from a defensive master like that. And Mike McCallum, I sparred McCallum in Vegas, another guy like good offense and defense blend, but on the inside, and they call him the body snatcher, and he's, you know, pulling into punches, and, you know, just there's so many guys. There's too many to name that were good defense.
I think it's the key, and I always thought that you want to be a really great defensive fighter. And I said this to you before, and this is where we talked earlier. Mentioned Duran. You know, that you can be right in the pocket, sitting right there, standing right in front of your guy, and he can't hit you. He can't hit you. You've got him tied up in knots, and you're cracking him. Boom. You're making him miss, and he thinks he's surrounded. Like Buddy said, you know, I got hit so much I thought I was surrounded. And you know, that's true greatness in a defensive fighter, and I still stand by that today. And you can look at any of the great fighters there today. You know, if you want to talk about Loma, if you want to talk any of them, you know, they all have good defense. You know, Teofimo Lopez is a hard guy to hit. He's a hard guy to hit. You know, he's a devastating puncher, but he's a hard guy to hit. So, you know, I think defense is so important, and your career lasts so much longer, and you get out of it so much better when you have great defense.
Once again, gentlemen, thank you so much for doing this. Another edition of the Calling Russ Anber podcast with our good friend Iceman John Scully, who no finger in the screen for the entire hour of the conversation. So we're making progress here. Scully's finger will make its return at some other point. Thank you for tuning in, everyone. Have a good night, and we'll talk soon.
All right, Matt. See you later. Thanks, Scully.
Good show.